The pen hovered right above the bottom signature line. Adeline Whitfield reviewed the number again. $184,000 to restore the local library. Her famous grandfather's name stamped on that founding plaque. Across the table sat a quiet man, his flannel dusted in sawdust. The aging craftsman hadn't spoken in 3 full minutes. "I don't hand blank checks to unknown workers," she snapped. "Not for a building my grandfather personally paid to construct." The humble mechanic didn't flinch. He simply placed a faded yellow document on the mahogany table and backed away. The heiress glanced down, and her hand immediately started shaking. Theodore Hargrove and Harlan Whitfield, Cedar Falls, 1962. 3 days earlier, you and I would have found Wesley balanced on a ladder, deep inside the library's grand reading room. He traced a hairline fracture in the heavy timber ceiling beam. Down below, his worn architectural notebook sat open on the sill. The script across the pages was tiny and perfectly precise. It held complex load calculations and structural symbols. This definitely wasn't the work of an average repairman. His granddaughter Lily sat on a nearby bench, sketching quietly by the tall, south-facing glass window. The 9-year-old had her mother's dark hair, but she inherited her father's quiet, enduring patience. Outside the glass, Iowa's very first winter snow had just started falling onto the empty streets. The snowflakes were tiny and bone-dry, the exact kind that always promised a brutally long winter. Marguerite Vance, the head librarian for 41 long years, handed the little girl some warm cocoa. Then she lingered, watching the master craftsman up on the ladder. She recognized those working hands. She knew exactly how they traced the deep grain of the ancient timber. The way he tilted his head to catch hollow echoes. The way he muttered complex measurements under his breath without even glancing at the open pages. Decades ago, she had stood in this exact spot watching another man do the exact same routine back in 1962. She was only 27 back then, and that master builder on the ladder was Theodore Hargrove. But Marguerite stayed perfectly quiet. She had been guarding the true history of this room for a lifetime. Wesley finally climbed down from the rungs, neatly folded a paper into thirds, and slid it into his worn back pocket. His restoration quote came in 30% cheaper than the massive corporate firms had aggressively demanded. He refused to charge for his own sweat. He only asked them to cover the raw materials. Walking out, he gave Marguerite a quiet nod. She nodded back, letting the unspoken legacy hang between them. Lily waved from the bench, completely focused on her beautiful pencil drawing. Outside by the curb, a sleek black Lexus sat idling, its thick exhaust choking the freezing winter air. The tinted glass rolled down. Councilman Brent Kettering coldly watched Wesley trudge toward his battered pickup truck. The politician didn't say a word. He just stared like a greedy hawk spotting easy prey in the tall grass. Wesley ignored the glare. He just climbed into the cab and drove away. Let's jump 80 miles south to Des Moines. Inside her inherited trust office, Adeline was scanning 4 competing bids for that exact same project. Her manicured finger paused right at the bottom of the pile. W. Hargrove Repairs out of Cedar Falls. That specific family name tugged at a deeply buried memory in her mind. A box inside her grandfather's study, old letters she had never even opened. She just couldn't place the connection. Caleb, her assistant, poked his head through the door. Councilman Kettering called 3 times today. He wants all the local bidders instantly disqualified. Says it gives the council an excuse to deem the property beyond repair. And what exactly does he plan for the land? Caleb paused. He wouldn't say. Adeline faced the window. Snow-blanketed Des Moines. You see, history always buries the true builders. Let us look closely at this story. Miles north, snow fell on a clock tower the CEO had not seen since childhood. Her grandfather brought her there once, during a late autumn. But the memory of that season was mostly gone. She only really recalled the rich scent of his coat. Meanwhile, in a humble house on the edge of town, Wesley Hargrove burned the evening toast again. His daughter laughed. He quietly apologized for the 3rd time this week. "Dad, you're an awful cook," she teased, "but you draw nice." She slid her worn sketchbook across the table. "Can you help me with my school project? I need to draw a local building. I picked the public library." He grabbed the pencil. In 20 seconds flat, the library materialized on the page. The arched roof, every single window perfectly scaled. He didn't even measure. His hands just moved. His daughter watched him in absolute quiet awe. How do you know it so perfectly? She asked. Because I grew up with it, he replied. Once she was asleep, he walked over to the stair cupboard and turned a tiny brass key in the lock. Inside, buried in tissue paper, sat dozens of rolled blueprints. The pages were soft, yellowed by time. He pulled one out and smoothed it over the table. The town library, the original construction plans, proudly signed by his father. And right under his dad, in a steady hand he never met but knew about all his life, was a name. The second signature belonged to Harlan Whitfield, founding patron. By sunrise, Wesley drove the 80 miles to Des Moines in his beat-up Ford truck. He carried the formal repair bid and a single rolled paper under his arm. The winter snow had cleared overnight. The long drive was completely silent. A guard intercepted him inside the Grand Whitfield Heritage Trust lobby. Miss Whitfield never meets with everyday contractors. There's a process. I'll wait. Could be hours. I got time. The quiet mechanic sat on a fancy leather elevator bench. He ignored the glossy magazines. He never once checked his cell phone. He just pulled out paper and started sketching, slow and steady, muscle memory taking over like a man doing a familiar chore. 3 hours dragged on. The guard walked by twice, actively ignoring the old man. At 12:15, the CEO finally crossed the lobby, heading out for lunch. Her sharp heels echoed on stolen marble. She glanced at the bench, freezing in her tracks. The laborer was drafting a complex vaulted ceiling cross-section. Every single load-bearing joint was perfect. He drew straight lines without tools. The heavy proportions were flawless. Stick with me here. She only saw skill like that from architects with 30 years' experience, never from men in flannel. Come up to my office right now, she demanded. He slipped the paper away and followed the powerful air in total silence. Upstairs, the mechanic laid out the emergency repair strategy. He needed 0 notes. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had carried this structure in his bones forever. The old wooden framing was built for dynamic load distribution. The true builders engineered flexibility right into the structure. Because the deep dirt under Cedar Falls shifts a 1/4 inch every single winter. Swap those beams for heavy steel and you destroy the genius keeping that place standing. You don't fix it, you kill it. And where did you learn that? He let the silence hang. From my father. You and I know the look. She sized the old mechanic up entirely too long. I'll need to see your professional license, Mr. Hargrove. State code requires it. The forgotten builder hesitated, then opened his battered wallet and slid a card across her desk. Wesley Hargrove, AIA, Senior Principal, Hargrove & Associates, New York City. That license expired 4 years ago. The CEO glared at the plastic, then right at him. Taking in the worn flannel, his calloused builder hands and dust coating his sleeves. Yet Hargrove & Associates remained a legendary architectural firm across the entire Northeast. Her late grandfather always spoke that founder's name with a deep reverence he saved for true masters. I don't understand. My wife died 4 years ago, the old man said, breast cancer. It took 8 months. I couldn't keep working in that corporate office. I brought my daughter home to Cedar Falls and I started over with my hands. I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I've turned down 20 restoration contracts in the last 3 years just to stay anonymous. Then why come here now? Because this is my father's building, and he didn't want anyone to tear it down. He slowly unrolled the original blueprint across her polished desk. That paper was 64 years old, its fragile edges worn down soft as cloth. Adeline finally saw her grandfather's hidden signature for the very first time. She went completely silent. She brushed the faded ink with one fingertip, like touching the face of a ghost she loved. Stick with me here. After Wesley left, she headed down to the family's private underground archive. That heavy door had stayed locked since the day the old tycoon died, 6 months prior. She had never dared to open those dusty cedar boxes inside. The courage simply wasn't there. One crate read LAP 1962. Inside sat a stack of letters bound with string. The first aged page she unfolded began, Theodore, regarding the arch load problem. I think your son will solve it when he grows up. The CEO read those words twice, then a third time. She sank onto the freezing concrete floor of that forgotten archive, paralyzed for 20 straight minutes. 2 days later, Adeline secretly drove to Cedar Falls without telling anyone. She needed to see this hidden legacy herself. Sleep hadn't come easy since uncovering that archive. Marguerite met her right at the front doors. The old librarian didn't look surprised at all. She guided Adeline through the historic building, room by silent room, like a quiet docent showing an absolute stranger around their own family home. Inside the main reading room, Adeline froze near the wall right behind the librarian's desk, spotting a tiny bronze plaque she had never laid eyes on. Harlan Whitfield, founding patron 1962. He never told me, Adeline whispered. He came here every summer until you were 8, Marguerite said softly. He used to hold you on his lap, right over in the children's reading corner. You wouldn't remember it. You were very small. He read you the Beatrix Potter books, the same stories over and over, until you knew every word by heart and would correct him if he skipped one. Adeline collapsed into a tiny wooden chair right next to the children's library shelves. Those seats were built for 6-year-olds. With her knees jammed against her chest, she sat perfectly still. Outside the tall window, bare branches of a massive oak tree scraped against the cold glass. Somewhere upstairs, a dusty radiator ticked. She didn't cry, but her eyes welled up completely. You and I see it now. She grew up thinking her grandfather only cared about corporate boardrooms. She never knew this quiet side existed. A forgotten town 100 miles north of Des Moines, where local kids simply remembered his weight in a chair. She never imagined the old man had a secret life, one completely separate from his corporate balance sheets. The front door swung open. Wesley trudged in, lugging his ladder over his shoulder. The man returned just to double-check those cracked corner joints. He spotted Adeline slumped in a tiny chair. Her eyes were red. He froze right in his tracks. Complete silence filled the room. He crossed to the back corner, positioned his ladder, and inspected the framework. Adeline just watched the man work. His calloused hands guided over the old wood with pure familiarity, like a man touching the doorframe of a home he personally built and lived in forever. Then the brass bell on the front door chimed again. Little Lily wandered in, hauling her backpack and a sketchbook. She paused, spotting this strange, wealthy woman sitting in her favorite reading spot. "Hi," Lily chirped. "Do you like reading?" Adeline gave a smile. Her first real smile in 2 entire weeks. "I definitely do. I am drawing this library for school."
"Want to see?"
She spun the worn sketchbook around. The building sat on the paper in sharp, deliberate strokes. Those were the steady architectural lines no little kid could ever sketch completely alone. Adeline stared. Stick with me here, because she recognized those exact pencil strokes from a hidden blueprint signed 64 years ago. 3 generations sharing the exact same gifted hands. Wesley stepped off his ladder. He caught his little girl sitting beside Adeline, knees brushing, the open sketchbook resting between them. The tired mechanic froze for a second. Then Lily glanced up. "Dad, look at my new friend." Wesley gave a polite nod. His worn face gave absolutely nothing away. Later, driving home, Lily whispered, "I really like her." Wesley just let out a low rumble in his throat. He flipped the truck radio on, snapped it off again, and drove the remaining miles in total quiet. 80 miles away at City Hall, Brent Kettering shut his heavy office door and dialed 2 numbers. "We are pushing that vote to Friday. If the Whitfield Trust avoids signing the repair bill in 72 hours, that old structure fails the remediation code automatically. That corner lot belongs to me. I spent 3 years plotting this. Do not tell me I lose everything now just because some rich lady from Des Moines wants to play savior." He slammed the phone down, poured a stiff drink, and stared out the glass, just watching the evening street lamps flicker on across Cedar Falls. That night, Adeline checked into the lone, rundown hotel in Cedar Falls. The cheap room offered a faded quilt and a dusty coffee machine with 1 tiny packet of grounds. She hauled up a heavy leather bag, stuffed with old letters, scattering them across the mattress. She sat reading until midnight. 3 solid years of letters linking Harlan Whitfield and Theodore Hargrove, arguing over complex cantilever physics. Detailed pencil sketches crowded the margins, endless debates over which thick glass could actually survive brutal Iowa winters. You might find this crazy, but those men spent 6 whole months arguing over the children's reading corner skylight. The yellowed pages proved they were slowly softening toward each other during the fights. Exactly how proud men of that generation softened, bonding solely over the grueling work and eventually over quiet family matters. Theodore wrote about his little boy, sobbing for a week over a dead pet rabbit. Harlan wrote of his granddaughter, finally learning to walk. The builders shared stories of their kids with the raw honesty men only use once they drop the polite corporate masks. Let's look at the final letter from December 1962. Thank you, Theo. Cedar Falls gets a beautiful library built not from simple stone and wood, but from the quiet patience of two working men believing in something far beyond themselves. You and I know history forgets the builders. She read the proof twice, carefully folding it. Next morning at 7, the powerful CEO knocked on a small cedar house out on the working-class edge of town. The worn porch boards were swept. Little child-sized snow boots waited patiently by the welcome mat. A dried wheat wreath hung crookedly. Then the tired aging mechanic opened the door. He'd slept in his worn flannel, his gray hair stuck up on one side. Holding a coffee mug, he muttered, "You're here early." She just replied, "I know." Lily peeked out behind him in pajamas. "Is the executive staying for breakfast?" Wesley looked down at his daughter, then back at the CEO. Slowly, he stepped back from the doorway. The executive sat at their table, eating eggs with browned edges and predictably burned toast made by the very hands that helped build her stolen empire. She genuinely laughed out loud when Lily explained that her dad had been burning breakfast bread for 4 years and still had not learned. Wesley faked being deeply offended, which left Lily absolutely delighted. Their small kitchen filled with everyday warmth, sounds this old craftsman's house had not heard in a very long time. Once Lily left for school, Adeline spread the forgotten blueprints across the kitchen table. Wesley read the document slowly. His coffee went cold. By the last page, his tired eyes filled. "My dad died when I was 14, he whispered. He left me the blueprints and one strict rule: don't let anyone tear it down. I never really understood until this week. Why did you hide who you were, even from a guy like me? I refused help because of the rich legacy name on your card. I wanted the old structure saved because its true craftsmanship deserves saving." Adeline studied the humble builder silently. She finally understood why her wealthy grandfather trusted a working man named Hargrove. Honest people like the Hargroves never asked for anything themselves. "I'll sign the emergency repair bill today," she promised, but the mechanic just shook his head. "Your signature isn't enough. Kettering already bought 3 votes on the town council. The restoration project goes nowhere without the city council approving the chosen contractor. Either way, we must win this fight in open chambers. Come with me to Thursday's town council meeting." The working class packed the chamber to the back wall. Most folks wanted the historic library saved, but regular everyday people weren't on the corrupt council. Adeline sat right up front in a sharp gray suit, the original blueprints resting on her lap. The forgotten mechanic hid in the back row with Lily. He hated having wealthy eyes on him. Lily brought her sketchbook, drawing the back of the greedy councilman's bald head with pure, intense concentration. Kettering spoke up first. He had hired his own slick engineering firm. Their fake report claimed the old structure was completely unsafe for public use. He spoke with the fake, calculated sadness of a man pretending to mourn. "The old library is a treasure," he lied. "But we have to prioritize the safety of the children here in Cedar Falls." Kettering glanced at the back row, straight at Lily. Wesley squeezed his daughter's hand. Adeline stood and presented the working man's true repair proposal. 184 grand, 6-month authentic rebuild. Regional mill materials, honest local labor. Kettering just smiled thinly. A mere local handyman lacking an active architectural license here in the state of Iowa cannot legally authorize a historic heritage restoration plan. We see his game. State code is perfectly clear, I'm sure, miss. You and I know Whitfield and her fancy lawyers saw this coming. That was the boardroom trap. Wesley let his New York license expire years ago. Iowa law demanded a current state architect to sign off on saving those historic walls. Renewing paperwork takes 90 days. The final vote was today. Adeline had nothing. She turned toward the back row, where the old builder stood up. He stayed quiet, just raised a calloused hand for the public comment period. The chairman nodded. Wesley marched down the long aisle of the chamber. Lily grabbed Marguerite's hand, watching her father walk past the suits. The old librarian came dressed quietly, taking a back seat on purpose to watch. Wesley slid the original drafted blueprint onto the projector. Silence hit the room when 2 faded signatures flashed on screen. He spoke with steady grit. "I am not asking for your trust, just look at the bones of this building. 2 working men built it so the kids of Cedar Falls had a place to read. One of those forgotten men was my father. The other was her grandfather over there. He pointed at Whitfield. Heads turned. I came to do the labor because I owed him. I can fix a paper license, but we cannot rebuild this history once it falls. The room buzzed. They delayed the final vote until Friday morning. Kettering demanded proof of the ink, marching back to his seat, refusing eye contact. That very night, a heavy brick smashed through the front window of Cedar House. Shards of glass sprayed across the woven rug. A folded message was strapped tightly to the stone. "Return Cedar Falls to the locals. Outsiders stay out," Lily screamed. Wesley shielded his daughter against his chest as shattered pieces settled around their boots. Here is where the real foundation cracks. For the first time in 4 years, he grabbed his phone at midnight, dialing a number that wasn't a clinic or school. Adeline picked up on ring number 2. She drove 80 miles through the pitch-black, empty roads. Her car radio hummed with dead static between forgotten towns. When she finally pulled up, the county sheriff was wrapping his useless incident report. Little Lily had cried herself unconscious against her father's shoulder. Once the squad car vanished, Adeline and the tired builder sat on the freezing steps. Neither said a word for 10 long minutes. Light snow drifted slowly between the wooden porch beams. She pulled off her heavy wool coat, draping it over his broad shoulders. He let it stay. "I am sorry," she finally whispered. "You did not throw it." "No, but it flew because of me, because of him. There is a huge difference." They sat in total silence until the harsh eastern sky grayed. Safe inside, Lily slept with both arms clutching a stuffed rabbit. At 6 in the morning, Marguerite knocked softly on the heavy front door. She stepped inside wearing muddy winter boots and an old church coat, gripping a small wooden cedar box in both hands. Wesley carefully took it, resting it on the table. "I have guarded this for 41 years, Marguerite said. "I promised Theodore Hargrove I would keep it shut until this town truly needed it." Wesley slowly lifted the heavy lid. "You and I know blueprints hold the truth." Inside sat the original construction documents, stamped in 1962 by the Historic Property Office. The grand old library was officially registered as a permanent heritage site, and folded right beneath. "You and I know history hides things." Among the engineering papers lay Harlan Whitfield's single letter. Adeline read it aloud. Her hands trembled as she turned that old page. Those typed words forged a binding legal covenant. To tear down the Cedar Falls Library, you absolutely needed written consent from the Whitfield Heritage Trust. This hidden safeguard sat quietly recorded with the county registrar. Signed in March of 1962, it carried 3 sworn signatures and the official state seal. The agreement was never canceled. It possessed as much raw power as the day they signed it. "Why hide this until now?" Adeline asked the aging librarian. Marguerite's voice held steady, but her tired eyes certainly did not. Brent Kettering's father sat on that exact council in 1985. He tried to bulldoze the working man's legacy back then. "Theodore begged me to guard this letter as our ultimate line of defense. I kept it hidden today because Brent threatened to steal my pension. Last October, he sat in my office and spelled out my ruin if I ever spoke up. He controls the votes. He could crush me entirely." She looked at Wesley, the mechanic, after hearing about the brick and his little girl. "I simply could not hide it anymore." Wesley wrapped his arms around her. Marguerite finally wept for the first time in 41 hard years. She sobbed into the shoulder of a builder whose father she once loved like her own brother. Adeline phoned the trust's high-paid attorney at 7 flat that morning. By 10 o'clock, the historic safeguard was lodged with the district court. By 11, physical copies sat on the desks of every town council member. Kettering found out within the hour. He phoned Adeline, his arrogant voice strained. He threatened a massive lawsuit against the trust for disrupting his municipal machinery. Adeline gave him one sentence. "Mr. Kettering, my grandfather saw you coming in 1962. She hung up the phone. That afternoon, the tired mechanic sat facing Lily at the kitchen table. She watched his worn face for a while. "Dad, you look sad." "I am not sad. I am just thinking about Addie's grandfather." Lily pondered this. She drew a careful little line in her sketchbook. "Is Addie going to stay here with us?" Wesley had no answer. Come Friday morning, the council chamber was absolutely stuffed to double its normal capacity. The local paper splashed the worker's blueprint photograph right across the front page. Even the Des Moines Register printed the story of the forgotten builder's covenant. Out in the parking lot, a regional television news crew had already set up their heavy cameras. Kettering attempted one final dirty trick. He demanded they toss the old documents for lacking proper modern certification. The attorney simply produced the cross-notarized copy alongside the original, undeniable historic proof. The chairman ruled the sweat-stained papers valid. Kettering's face went totally pale. The council now faced two choices. First, honor that 1962 covenant. Second, approve the working man's restoration plan for Hargrove. Stick with me here. Before the vote, they offered Wesley the microphone, but the mechanic refused it. He marched right down the center aisle, planting his boots beside Adeline in the very front row. He turned slowly to face the crowded room. He had no slick speech prepared. You and I know this exact tone. He spoke like a tradesman who accepted he might lose. My own father laid these bricks before I was even born. He truly believed that a town missing its library is a town without any real memory. I fled New York because my wife died and my entire world crumbled right along with her. Wesley told them he only came to Cedar Falls to find his father's forgotten legacy. He wasn't asking them to save the old architecture for himself. He begged them to preserve that hidden craftsmanship for his daughter and all their children. Picture this with me. Dead silence. In the back row, a forgotten woman wept. Lily sat near Marguerite, proudly watching the man who built things. Adeline rested her hand near his rough, calloused fingers, not touching, but close enough. Then came the vote, 5-2. The old builder's covenant stood firm. The restoration passed. Kettering, the slick developer, simply stood and stormed out. A reporter chased the suit outside, shouting questions about his hidden financial ties, connecting his corporate firm to the demolition scheme that erased hard-working history. He kept silent, speeding off with a furious, tight-jawed glare. 2 weeks later, the FBI officially investigated his shady corporate conflicts. Before that very year finally ended, 3 of his partners faced indictment. Their soulless strip mall, meant to erase the historic library, was quietly pulled from the county zoning board. When the room cleared, Wesley and Adeline just stayed in their seats. Lily sprinted down the aisle, climbing straight into her hard-working father's lap. For the first time, Wesley let his calloused arm wrap around Adeline's shoulders. Just a brief second, then he pulled away like it never even happened at all. Adeline didn't say a word. She just offered a gentle smile. Lily missed absolutely nothing. She grinned at them both, radiating the quiet satisfaction of a kid who watched the foundation being laid and knew it was solid. From the very back rows, old Marguerite watched them closely. After 41 years of total silence, she knew her sacred vow remained intact. She shut her eyes for one deep breath, honoring Theodore's forgotten legacy. Remembering the exhausted, loving way he looked at her that autumn before he finally passed. He once warned her that some historical debts take generations to finally settle. She never truly understood that until today. That very evening, Adeline stayed for supper. Lily played chef, pouring out 3 bowls of cereal and drowning one entirely in milk. They laughed harder than they ate. For once, the tired carpenter didn't burn a thing. Before Adeline headed out, Wesley handed her a flat package wrapped in rough paper. Look closely with me here. She unwrapped a bold pencil sketch of the library, its structural lines completely confident, signed W. Hargrove, 2026. Right beneath it was a faded copy of his father's original builder's mark from 1962. Adeline cradled the precious history. She stayed quiet. She just stared deeply at the humble builder. 6 weeks later, the hard physical restoration commenced. Wesley tackled the library roof alongside a small, gritty crew of local carpenters. This is what we miss. They placed beams by hand, honoring the original forgotten joinery. Those working men shared thermos coffee and hammered away until the sun faded. Marguerite visited every single afternoon, carrying fresh sandwiches. She just retired, but swore she wouldn't sit idly while the working class rebuilt her town's history. Adeline returned to the dusty Cedar Falls every weekend. On paper, she simply supervised the trust operations. Caleb finally quit asking why she always fled to Iowa from Friday afternoon until Monday morning. He even stopped booking her into useless Monday morning corporate meetings before noon. Lily had finally grown used to seeing the CEO at their Friday dinner table. The kid even started sketching the woman into her little drawings. Nothing fancy, just 3 quiet figures at a kitchen table and 3 pairs of work boots by the door. 3 worn coffee mugs each morning, even though the girl only drank cocoa. Come with me on this. One Saturday, the aging mechanic walked Adeline out to his humble shed. His calloused hands turned the heavy padlock key, sliding the weathered door wide open. Inside sat his father's dusty blueprints, decades of brilliant unseen backbreaking labor. Public buildings, family homes, complex restoration blueprints. The forgotten drafting paper felt soft and pale with age. She traced the dusty rolls, realizing these hidden plans held the true foundation of her family's empire. "You want to haul these back to your corporate trust?" Wesley asked her quietly. "It is a legacy belonging to both our families." The powerful executive just shook her head. "I want them here, where they actually belong." A heavy silence followed. You and I know what here meant, and it was about far more than just faded blueprints. That evening, after the little girl went to sleep, the mechanic and the CEO shared the porch. The winter snow had finally thawed. The air smelled of damp earth and coming spring. A freight train rumbled south of town, that long, low whistle carried across the quiet, empty fields. He finally opened up about Margaret. It was the very first time the stoic builder had mentioned his late wife to an outsider. He quietly explained those brutal 8 months and the endless chemotherapy. And he remembered the day Margaret begged him to promise he would never turn into a broken, bitter man. A promise the hard-working mechanic had truly struggled to keep over the lonely years. He shared how much Margaret loved driving snowstorms, worn-out books, and terrible cowboy movies. She had dreamed of 3 kids, but they only managed 1. He noted Lily looked nothing like her mother except for those familiar, soulful eyes. He said Margaret would have honestly liked her. In fact, Margaret would have absolutely insisted on it. Adeline sat there, completely speechless. She rested her head against the working man's shoulder. He stayed perfectly still. A barred owl echoed from the dark woods behind them. A bright moon climbed above the barren branches. The next morning, Lily marched into the kitchen, holding a brand new drawing in her small hand. It showed the 3 of them standing proudly outside the newly restored local library. Beneath the sketch, in careful 9-year-old print, she had written, "My new family." Adeline gripped that simple paper with both her hands. She stayed silent for a long time. Finally, the CEO opened her arms. The little girl climbed right in, refusing to let go. Wesley watched from the kitchen door. The tough mechanic turned away, blaming the invisible dust in his eye. The Cedar Falls Public Library finally reopened on a bright Saturday morning in May. Townsfolk brought out flags and fresh-cut spring flowers. The local high school band played a welcoming tune from the front lawn. Kids chased across the grass. Someone set up a cheap folding table loaded with sweet lemonade and shortbread wrapped in waxed paper. An old stranger walked right up to Wesley, shook his calloused hand, and simply said, "Your daddy fixed up our broken porch back in '73. He walked away before Wesley could even reply. A brand new bronze plaque hung proudly in the main entrance hall. Restored 2026 in honor of Theodore Hargrove and Harlan Whitfield, built by the men who believed. Wesley stood proudly beside Adeline on those wide front steps. He gave no grand formal speech. He thanked the town, thanked Marguerite, named his entire working crew, and quietly stepped back. You see, builders rarely like microphones. Marguerite cut the ribbon, crying softly for the unsung hands. She spoke one single sentence into the microphone, talking as if the only people listening were the 2 forgotten men who actually built this place. She whispered, "Theodore, Harlan, we saved your work." Little Lily rushed the steps, hugging her father's weary legs. She made a large drawing for Marguerite, proudly showing the newly restored library. Soft pencil strokes revealed the heavy timber beams holding up the ceiling cutaway. Her father taught her to trace those builders' lines. Marguerite framed it for the children's room that afternoon. She bought the wood herself, long after the wealthy donors and cameras had finally gone home. Wesley, Adeline, and Lily stepped into the massive reading hall. The room smelled of honest labor, fresh varnish, and old paper. Sunlight pierced the stained glass, casting heavy, colorful pillars across the floorboards. Exactly as the forgotten Theodore Hargrove drafted it 64 years earlier. You and I might just see light, But that afternoon, a deliberate golden ribbon struck the central table. Wesley stared at that calculated light, then at Adeline standing right within its warmth. He finally realized his working-class father engineered this exact moment, a silent gift for someone standing there on a random day decades later. He was never just drafting a library building. He built a quiet sanctuary for the distant future, a place where two lost people could meet, never needing to explain why it felt like home. Adeline turned, catching his gaze. She demanded no answers, and he offered no spoken words. Laughing, Lily grabbed their calloused hands, pulling them both toward the colorful children's section. Later that evening, Wesley walked Adeline out to the quiet front porch alone. The working town below them slept. A lone truck rumbled down the distant river road. The May air felt warm, and the old maple in the yard was finally pushing out its fresh leaves. He pulled a heavy brass key from his pocket, pressing it into her palm. "Not today, not this week, but whenever you are ready, I want you to have this." Adeline gripped the builder's key tightly. She answered with absolute silence. She just held the mechanic's hand. For once, neither of them tried pulling away. They simply stood there, no dramatic Hollywood kiss, no grand sweeping embrace. Just the CEO's hand resting in the builder's under that May Cedar Falls sky. Behind the screen door, they heard little Lily murmuring to her worn stuffed rabbit, whispering a very serious tale about a historic library that survived the wrecking ball against all odds. "Stick with me here." That autumn, the trust announced a totally new initiative, the Hargrove Whitfield Foundation, architecture and historic preservation scholarships for working-class kids in forgotten Midwestern farm towns. The first class started in September. 8 rural students awarded full tuition, plus 2 paid summer construction apprenticeships with the Heritage Trust annually. The boss herself drafted that humble 3-paragraph press release late one evening. One night at the kitchen table, Wesley stood close behind her, reading over her shoulder, quietly suggesting where to place commas. Adeline shifted part of the trust office straight to Cedar Falls. She traded her luxury Des Moines condo for a small house near the library. The realtor claimed closing in 9 days was impossible for that market, yet it happened. Caleb visited twice a month, working from a tiny desk Adeline squeezed into the spare bedroom of her new home. He always brought fresh donuts from that little local bakery over on Elm Street, completely ignoring that the mechanic's truck was parked there by 8 in the morning. And Wesley finally renewed his architectural license in Iowa. He wasn't chasing full-time fame anymore. He just needed the ink to quietly save our state's forgotten historic architecture. One job every 6 months, no more. The real work was waiting at home. He needed to be right there when his little girl got back from school. The quiet moments mattered most, just burning the morning toast. That late October afternoon, Wesley, Adeline, and Lily strolled past the grand old library after the final school bell rang. The autumn leaves had turned crisp. You could smell wood smoke drifting from the east. Lily gripped a folded paper, her very first architectural sketch under her father's quiet guidance. A tiny cedar cabin featuring 3 crooked figures resting on the front porch. They stepped inside the lobby. Marguerite sat reading quietly. She officially retired last summer, but still showed up weekly to shelve books and study. Hearing them cross the heavy wooden threshold, she glanced up and warmly beamed. You and I know she was picturing Theodore and Harlan. 64 years ago, those unseen men sat right here, quietly signing the original library blueprints. She had held on to that silent memory for 40 long years. She never realized the hidden history was unfinished until today. Lily dashed toward the children's section. She claimed the tiny chair where her forgotten grandfather once cradled baby Adeline. She cracked open her heavy book and started reading. It told a story of a young builder crafting cardboard shelters for stray cats. Wesley and Adeline lingered at the room's quiet edge. His rough hand brushed hers. He didn't have to reach. She grabbed his hand, firmly weaving her fingers through his. "My father designed this vaulted ceiling," he whispered, "so the light would land right there at 3 in the afternoon every October day." Adeline glanced up. The golden rays were shining directly on Lily. "My grandfather chose your father for a reason," she murmured. "I think I understand it now." Wesley kissed the crown of her head just once, quietly profound, never dramatic. Just warm light, tightly gripped hands, and a kid enjoying a grand room 3 unseen generations kept standing. Beyond the handcrafted stained glass, winter's very first snow started drifting quietly over Cedar Falls. Let's step back together and look across that magnificent entrance hall. A tarnished bronze plaque caught the fading light. It read, "Restored 2026 by True Believers," and right beneath that, freshly carved last week, an addition. And by the forgotten hands who came after. Neither of them was even searching. And honestly, maybe that's exactly why it finally found them.